Dr. Jordan Peterson and Danica Patrick having a conversation titled "There Is No Free Sex." That definitely caught my attention, and I'm going to be watching it for the first time and reacting to it. So let's get it.
It's not like adolescents aren't confused about sex and their identity. That's what adolescence is confusion about sex and identity. And generally
Pure confusion about everything. What do I do? Who am I?
Yeah, exactly. And no wonder, right? Because you have a lot of choices ahead of you. And it's a tumultuous time. There's a lot of neurological reorganization.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it's too many choices.
Well, look, there's a huge literature on consumer choice. So let's say you might ask yourself, how many shampoos do you want to go look at when you're shopping? 1, 5, or 300?
5.
5, exactly. Why not 300? Because one of those 300 is the best.
Diminishing returns on my investment.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And how are you going to evaluate 300 items for quality? You just, no matter which one you pick, you've made a mistake.
So this is a big point because I feel like dating apps provide that exact same effect that they talk about. At some point, you start having this effect of diminishing returns because you constantly faced with choice, or not faced with choice, you are faced with a matter of infinite choice, I would say, on dating apps. And in your mind, if not this one, the next one going to pin out. But in reality, none of them pinning out because you don't know at this point which one is better. And there is a lack of commitment that's happening. Definitely one of the reasons why I completely eradicated dating apps from my life. I deleted the apps from my phone. I'm no longer going on the websites or anything to look for dates. It's just no longer worth it.
When you go into Subway and they say, how do you want your sandwich? Like, I want you to figure that out. That's why I'm paying for it. If I have to make every sandwich decision, I might as well make it. So people drown in choice very rapidly.
Right. Talk about anxiety, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, that is anxiety. It's terrible anxiety. And too many choices is anxiety. So, and it isn't like it's not like I know the answer to how much choice about your gender you should have. But I think that, we need to recognize that there's wide variation in personality within women and within men, even though there are differences. And mostly men and women overlap, by the way. So we're more the same than we are different, except at the extremes, and that matters. Mm-hmm. Like if you're low in agreeableness enough, 1 in 100, let's say, you're way more likely to be in prison. And so that's males. Mm-hmm. So there are not very many women in prison compared to men. And that's because at the extremes, there's a huge preponderance of aggressive men, physically aggressive men, even though at the middle point, there's a lot of overlap. People don't understand this.
Maybe then the other side of the question is then, why are people so offended so easily? I think there's more difficulty for each side to speak to each other, people to use the right terminology and words and not offend someone than ever too. So why are people seemingly more easily offended?
It's interesting that she's even asking this question because I think there are certain topics of a conversation that are offensive to people in nature. Like whenever there's a conversation that's taking place between the differences between the genders, and particularly if one of the touch points, shortcomings of any given gender, I think automatically you are faced with pushback because quite frankly, no one, women or men, like to hear negative things about their gender as a whole. The knee-jerk reaction is automatically to disprove any type of negative connotations about a gender. I think that that's a legitimate issue, and that's why it's important, I think, when having these conversations is to be able to have a factual references for one. Secondly is to make it clear that the point of the conversation is to navigate the issue, not to blame all the representatives of a particular gender for their shortcomings.
That's a really good question. It's hard to say because people have been offended for a long time. The moral majority was offended for a long time in the 80s. and there was plenty of censorship and that sort of thing. I, Again, it's one of those things that's very difficult to track across time. It might be that we're exposed to more things that offend us now. I mean, you go on the net, if you can't find something to be offended by, you're not trying very hard. Well, that could just be it, right? I mean, imagine that. We never want to underestimate the impact of insane technological transformation.
I believe it's easier to be offended to have a difficult conversation, because if I pinpoint something in the conversation that I dislike and I feel passionately about arguing against that point, then I have an opening, so to speak, for me to take in order to argue my point and defend my point viciously. Whereas having a deep, well thought of conversation, going back and forth and creating dialogue about any given issue, is very difficult, because it requires the ability to listen another side's point. It requires the ability to think that you might not have the entire picture. There's a need to kind of suppress your ego, offer yourself a possibility you might not be right about this given issue of discussion.
I mean, you can see everything all the time about anything. And so I don't know if people are more easily offended or if there's just way more offensive things.
So maybe it's a matter of just reducing the amount of options, reducing exposure. I mean, is this a remedy for clarity, for less volatility, less offensive, less chance to be offended?
Well, who knows, right? I mean, Twitter seems to be a good way of being offended continually. And offending, yeah. And, that might be a consequence of its structure. It's limited. It seems to reward impulsivity. It seems to transmit bad better than good quite rapidly. We don't know what these technologies do to people or to communication.
Until recently, we did not have a chance to express our opinion so easily, so openly. Anyone can go on Twitter, even some asshole that has no business commenting. And when I say asshole, I don't say it lightly. I mean, there are people who will purposely trying to make somebody else's life more difficult, who purposely will try to put people down. You see those people all the time. Twitter is a great example of it, because it's quick communication. You don't have to come in and actually show who you are. You can have an avatar without your picture, and you can be just sitting behind the monitor somewhere or behind your phone screen and spit poison. We live in unprecedented times. We see that immediate feedback, even from individuals that really creating issues. They're not having constructive conversations. They're not, thinking through their comments. They're just commenting. And by the way, some of these individuals may have miserable lives. They might have traumatic lives. And these same individuals who can feel miserable on their own, in their own life, they may choose to make somebody else's life a little bit worse. And unfortunately, that's how it is.